Well, hello, City United family and friends and family around the globe. We're so glad that you've tuned in with us. Hey, we're doing something a little bit different this year. I'm Pastor Pencil, and we thought it'd be great to do a Christmas story that you could gather the family around, use any time during the Christmas season, and share this story with your family. It's a really special story for me because my son Rusty actually wrote it this year. So let's gather the family. You ready? Here we go. This is called A Paper Crown. Little Eddie Wilson was woken up by his baby brother. He was loudly crying in the room right next to Eddie's. He could already hear his mother walking down the hallway to make sure everything was all right. Eddie let out a long sigh. It had taken him very long to fall asleep, and now his brother had ruined everything. In the morning, it was finally Eddie's favorite day of the year, Christmas. It had taken every ounce of his concentration to force his eyelids closed and finally to fall asleep. But now he was wide awake again with the images of presents by the tree dancing in his mind. Nearly an hour passed before Eddie's mom was able to calm down his baby brother. It was silent again, but it just didn't matter. Eddie was too excited to fall back to sleep. After one more failed attempt at closing his eyes, he decided that enough was enough. He slowly opened his bedroom door and very carefully patted his way down the stairway. Each step creaked beneath his feet, but even that wasn't enough to convince Eddie to go back to bed. He was committed now, for better or for worse. Through the darkness of the living room, he could just make out the outline of the Christmas tree beside the fireplace. And beneath the tree, beckoning him to come forth, were his presents. Laser focused on one task, Eddie approached the tree. The closer he got, the more he could make out that one present that had consumed his thoughts over the past few weeks. It wasn't as big as some of the others, but it was wrapped in shiny gold wrapping paper. And it had a bright red ribbon tied around its center. Unlike the other presents, he couldn't quite figure out what was in the inside, and it had made up his mind. He raced with possibilities on what could it be. Well, now was his chance to finally find out. A part of him tried to convince Eddie to be patient, but he knew that the moment he tried to close his eyes, his annoying baby brother would start wailing again. Angry at his brother, Eddie grabbed that gold present with both hands. As he was about to tear his way through the shiny paper, a lamp on the coffee table suddenly turned on. The living room filled with light, revealing Grandpa Jack sitting on the sofa staring at Eddie with one eyebrow raised. "Boo!" Grandpa Jack declared, with a slight grin on his face. Frightened and embarrassed, Eddie dropped the present and tried to run back to his room. Grandpa Jack scooped up Eddie with one arm and placed him on the couch next to him. For a second or two, they simply stared at each other. Then Grandpa Jack began to quietly chuckle. "That baby brother of yours is pretty loud, huh?" Grandpa Jack asked. Eddie simply nodded, still pretty embarrassed. "Yeah. He woke me up too. I wonder if maybe you'd try something like this, so I figured I'd have a little sit on the couch." "Guess I was right," Grandpa Jack said, this time a little more serious. Eddie's eyes began to well up with tears. I tried to be good. I even fell asleep and everything." Eddie began to shout, his voice shaking with anger. Grandpa Jack gently put a finger over Eddie's lips. "Easy there, Eddie. You'll wake up your parents if you're not careful. Now be good, grandson, and hand me that present you were about to tear to pieces." Confused, Eddie froze for a moment or two before getting off the couch and picking up the golden present. He handed it to Grandpa Jack before sitting down on the sofa. Grandpa Jack inspected the present carefully, making sure it was all right. "This one's actually from me, Eddie. So what do you say we open this one together?" "Right now?" Eddie asked, slightly confused. "Right now," Grandpa Jack declared. For the second time, Eddie nodded. This time, he started to smile. Grandpa Jack wiped away Eddie's tears with one finger, before carefully unwrapping the present. Instead of ripping the paper like Eddie was planning to, Grandpa Jack was able to remove the gold paper without as much as a single rip or a tear. Eddie was impressed. Grandpa Jack handed him the small cardboard box that had been inside all along, and Eddie quickly opened it, revealing the present within. It was a small, leather-bound book with words, Holy Bible, written in gold on the cover. Eddie ran his fingers over the old leather and began flipping the pages. There sure were a lot of words, which most definitely disappointed him just a little bit. But there was also some beautiful illustrations every few pages or so. Overall, Eddie didn't know what to make of this book. He had heard of the Bible before, but didn't really know anything about it. Grandpa Jack gently grabbed the book and slid closer to his grandson on the couch. All Bibles are special, Eddie, but this one particular is very special to me. My grandfather, your great-grandfather, printed this book in his bookshop. He even drew those pretty pictures you were looking at. Eddie looked at Grandpa Jack with his eyes wide, still very confused. Grandpa Jack sighed. I know, an old book is probably not the kind of present you were hoping for, Eddie, but the Bible is no ordinary book. In fact, it even explains what Christmas is all about. Did you know that? Grandpa Jack asked. Eddie shook his head. Grandpa Jack licked his fingertips before flipping the old Bible to the Gospel of Luke. He pointed his bony finger at Luke chapter 2. In this very chapter, Eddie, it revealed to us why Christmas is important. And no, Santa Claus doesn't show up even once. Eddie continued to be confused, but it wasn't long till Grandpa Jack was reading through the chapter aloud. Some of it was hard to follow, with some of the words even sounding like gibberish, but Eddie was no idiot. He was able to gather that a very special baby named Jesus was born in a stinky barn or something like that. And for some reason, shepherds and even a group of guys called wise men found out and gave the baby really valuable birthday presents. It was a sort of an odd story, but there was something about it that intrigued him. Before Grandpa Jack could finish reading, Eddie interrupted him. But what makes this Jesus baby so special, Grandpa? I just don't get it, Eddie asked. Grandpa Jack got real quiet as he pondered the question. Then out of the blue, he grabbed the shiny gold wrapping paper and began folding the corners. Eddie looked at his grandfather with awe as he deftly transformed the wrapping paper into something entirely new. In merely a minute or two, Grandpa Jack now held in his hands a little gold crown. He then placed the paper crown onto his grandson's head and simply admired it for a moment. Then he declared, "That's the only clue you get." Eddie took off the crown, held it in his hands. He stared at it for a second before the answer came to him. Only kings wear crowns. Was this Jesus baby a king, Grandpa Jack? Eddie asked, hoping he was onto something. Fire lit behind Grandpa Jack's eyes, and his mouth curled into a grin. Not a king, Eddie. The King. The King of Kings. The very God that created us and even loves you very much. He even loves that silly baby brother of yours. Eddie glanced back up at the stairs in the direction of his brother's room. He half expected to hear him crying again, but the house remained surprisingly quiet. All kinds of thoughts were now racing in his mind. Grandpa Jack could tell that his grandson was overwhelmed. He placed a comforting hand on Eddie's shoulders. You know what, Eddie? We should probably both get some sleep. In the morning, I'll read you more from this book. How's that sound? For the final time that night, Eddie nodded before heading back upstairs. Clutched tightly in his tiny hands was the paper crown. Eddie stared at it before entering the bedroom, and he paused. Instead of entering, he tiptoed his way to his brother's bedroom and very carefully opened the door. He approached his baby brother's crib and peered inside. In the glow of his brother's dinosaur nightlight, he could clearly see his baby brother soundly sleeping. As he watched his brother breathe tiny little breaths, he imagined what it must have been like to be the shepherds watching baby Jesus take his first breath. How strange it must have been for them to see the tiny little baby and know it was actually God himself in human form. The whole idea rocked Eddie's whole world. His baby brother annoyed him so much, and yet God had chosen to be one of these babies all those years ago. He wondered if even baby Jesus has cried as much as his brother did. What did all this mean? And why did Eddie care so much? He pondered these questions for a long time as he simply watched his brother sleep. If God himself had chosen to be one of these creatures, well, maybe, just maybe, babies weren't all that bad after all. Eddie felt his anger for his brother disappear, and for the first time since he was born, he truly enjoyed being in the same room with him. Eddie glanced back down at the paper crown. Very carefully, he placed it on his brother's head, making sure not to wake him up. Eddie then made his way back to his room, knowing in his heart that something had changed. In the morning, he would ask Grandpa Jack to read him more from that old, dusty book. The end. On behalf of all of us here at City United, Merry Christmas. May you and your family enjoy the wonder of Jesus, the King of Kings, being born for you and for me. Merry Christmas, everybody.